It's Sunday, and this video for me is a video that I'm challenged to share. It's a video that I've been thinking about making for the last few days, and it's a video that I'm not certain will be heard the way it's intended. Globally, I don't think there's any individual that hasn't at some level been impacted at this time in 2020 from either anger, hatred or fear, physical violence, war, and that may not be a direct activity. It may be they've had a life, a childhood, independent of those things, but their grandparents, their great-grandparents, going back generations, if not in the last 24, 48 hours of the last week. I've known for all my life that my blood runs bled and all our blood runs red. And yet, seemingly, we get hooked up, we get focused on our differences. Here in the UK, there's always been these differences of the north, the south, the rich, the poor, educated and not. Even within the same county, you have giant rivalries, and often they sort of splay up, they come into violence. When I was growing up, we had these football hooligan challenges, and one of the reasons I didn't actually go to football matches, it was not a light threat in the background, it was a very real danger. And this wasn't because of colour of skin, it wasn't because of money, there was something else going on. If I look back at my time at school, my time in my working environment, my time even in London in the last few years, seeing things happen again and again. I know there's been times when I have stood up, I've said, stop. I actually got out of a taxi once in Bermondsey and nervously asked people to stop doing what they were doing. And the challenge is, we don't know the whole story, we don't know the consequences. And at the same time, I think there is an element where we have a knowing in our hearts of that's okay and that's not. The challenge is, where do you draw the line? I've travelled internationally, and maybe you have too, and seen that different cultures have different styles of communication. Where in one community, having a quiet voice is good. In another, it might be deemed to be disrespectful. Somewhere else, where they might be lively, energetic, can also be felt to be aggressive. So how do we learn to communicate? How do we actually learn to really be with who we are and find a way forward? I've been really challenged by some of the things my friends, my associates, people I've known in the world have shared in the last 2-3 days. And I get that for them, they're speaking their truth in the way they are. And I'm not disrespecting it, I'm not making light of it. I've also watched how in the past people have not understood my background, my life, and they might judge me based on my face, my voice, my communication patterns, what they see me having on that day. I grew up with an incredible mother who caught polio when she was 4, but you wouldn't know that about me unless you got to know me. You wouldn't know where my grandparents were, the things they went through, the things I've been through, the things that my friends have been through, the things I'm passionate about, unless you actually took the time to listen and really genuinely ask questions. If I look back at the last decade, even the last year, and the last week, it's been that there's always the opportunity to learn more about somebody than you might realize. And how often in this world today, where there is this veneer of the web, with a veneer of, I know that person, that's not the whole story. And I'm trying to sort of be light about this, but it's not. I'm really, at the core of me, daunted and confused, confronted, because I can see how much there is a gap between what I would love to be happening in the world and what there is, and seemingly my ability to be responsible and be accountable for making those changes. I don't get to say what you do. I don't get to say what you eat, what you drink. I can make suggestions, but even then that risks actually pushing somebody further away. We've seen that, I'm sure. Somebody says, hey, why don't you go study? Why don't you go exercise? Why don't you do this or don't do that? Often that very thing we resist is persisting, and that phrase becomes very common parlance. What we resist persists. I've seen the experience myself of being in London and being spat on by somebody because of who I was with at the time, and they had no idea of our relationships. I've seen people literally do behaviours that were mind-boggling to me, and yet I understand them. I've allowed myself to be able to have empathy, and I also know that I can't actually fully understand what somebody else would think. At a simplest level, You grew up in the country that you grew up in the life that you grew up in the time you grew up in. And it's easy for us to judge somebody else's life and time. And at the same time, I think we all want to survive. We all want to get past that. And ideally to find a way to live a life. I think nobody wakes up with a view to not do that. Especially not when they're born. I don't think I've ever met a child, 0, 1, 2, that you would say is an evil child. Nobody comes in looking like that. And yet clearly people do things that they might later regret. Clearly things happen in the moment that you can't undo. So I don't have an answer for you, but on Sunday, if you hear the ding on your phone, you hear a ding on Facebook, or simply give yourself a moment in time, just give yourself a pause. Give us a pause. And that aspect of being an us and a we, I think, is so vital. The aspect of I versus me versus you, that's so confrontational. And I get it. But often the conversation goes round and round and round, but without a step forward. I remember a conversation with one of my dear friends a couple of years ago in the UK. And she was very clear what she didn't want. It was like, this is bad and this is bad. Not relating to me, just things she'd read in the newspaper and her own experiences. And when I tried to ask her, like, how do you want things to be? There wasn't an answer. There wasn't a proposal that was actually workable. There was just literally an anger and a rage about what had gone on. Now, there are people that talk about the grief cycle, the different approaches to life and business, and I don't know all the answers. I don't know what's going to come tomorrow. But I know that today, at least I had a moment to consider, to think, and to be able to go, you know what, that's something I could get behind and put energy behind. And I'm deliberately not shouting and raging about things I could in this video, but hopefully this is useful and you get what I'm pointing at, because that's the start of communication, I think. Bye for now, and I'll see you next time.